Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Janusz Rewiński. The Ukraine peace process has seemingly gained some momentum in recent days, with US President Donald Trump hinting at potential three-way talks with President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, while European allies of Ukraine are doubling down on the threat of sanctions against Moscow. Yet beyond some promising signals lies the vast area of uncertainty, a space of variations where anything could happen. So will Ukraine's allies help Kyiv achieve a just peace? Can Trump's unpredictability play in Ukraine's favor, or will Moscow be able to exploit it instead? Joining us here today is Rostyslav, Khotin, senior editor at the Ukrainian service of Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, Janusz.
First of all, let's take a look at these latest updates concerning Trump. He said that he possibly might join the talks in Istanbul if President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin are present. Do you think we might see a three-way summit at the highest level, or is it just wishful thinking?
We don't know yet. Yes, indeed, President Trump has said that if talks, he welcomed actually the idea of talks on the 15th of May on Thursday in Istanbul. He said that he will be present in the region, somewhere in the region. He is going to tour Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And they are not far. Of course, this region is not far. The Gulf region is not far from Turkey. So he can theoretically join, definitely, especially after welcoming warmly the idea of these talks. But we don't know yet. We are not sure whether President Putin will come to these talks. We know that President Zelensky expressed readiness to go to Istanbul, and he is ready for direct talks with Russia. And Zelensky also welcomed warmly the idea of Trump's participation in these talks, converting them into two-way talks, into three-way talks, three-side talks. We'll see, but there are different indications whether Putin will come, actually. On one hand, his foreign minister had a phone conversation with Turkish counterpart regarding these talks on Thursday in Istanbul as a preparatory talks between foreign ministers of Russia and Turkey. On the other hand, several senior Russian parliamentarians expressed doubt that Putin will go, and expressed doubts that it's kind of wise for Russia to take part, because Ukraine, as they say, didn't fulfill any preconditions for these talks.
Well, that's a crucial moment, isn't it? Because the ball is in Putin's court, and this would be a signal. If he doesn't take part in these talks, the US might receive that, might interpret that as being tantamount to basically ignoring the peace process. Like, they have already issued warnings which are thinly veiled, but directed most likely at Russia and not at Ukraine, as was the case in previous weeks and months, saying that one side is taking part in this process, is willing to talk, and the other side not so much. So do you think that in the end, Putin is likely to skip the talks, thereby signaling to the US that he is not a serious person to talk to when it comes to ending this war?
It's difficult to predict Putin's moves because he's unpredictable. Russian leadership is unpredictable. Russia in general is unpredictable, especially during these years of full-scale war against Ukraine. So it's difficult to foresee what Putin how he will act. But he will look ridiculous, in my view, because the idea of holding talks in Turkey on the 15th of May, on Thursday, belongs to Putin. He was the initiator of these talks. He suggested this idea of direct talks with Ukraine in Istanbul on the 15th of May. But generally speaking, indeed, there is a game of kind of, bouncing back, the ping pong between Zelensky and Putin, between Ukraine and Russia recently. Like, we are against the war, we are for peace, Ukraine says, offering 30-day ceasefire, unconditional ceasefire on the land, in the air, on the sea. Then Putin said, no, I am for peace, you are for war, and offered this idea of talks in Istanbul. Then Zelensky quickly accepted this offer, saying, no, I am for peace. You are against peace. You are for war. There is this game played, but
the back and forth, right? Do you think that Ukraine's response was actually the best way in which they could have acted? Because Russia might have intended for talks to be just on a lower level, and then President Zelensky says, okay, I'm going to go there in person, basically daring Putin to finally engage in direct talks. And this is also Ukraine. Do you think Ukraine will be able to present this as a concession? Because before that, they said, no direct talks with Putin. Right now, they're saying, okay, we are ready to hold these talks. It's your turn to show if you're actually supporting the idea of a permanent and lasting peace.
Yeah, the thing is that when Putin indeed offered this idea of direct talks with Ukraine in Turkey, he thought about lower level talks, not summit, the full-fledged talks on the highest possible level between leaders of the countries. But then Zelensky has raised the stakes, offering that I personally will go, saying, I am ready to take part in it. So please, you also have to be represented Russian Federation on the highest level by your leader, Putin. So Zelensky raised the stakes. I don't know if a Russian president will not go to Turkey. It would be unacceptable for Ukraine to hold talks between Zelensky and, let's say, Russian foreign minister or defense minister or other senior officials. No. Zelensky international mandate, the image, the status of as a wartime leader of Ukraine is much higher than this Russian level of Russian officials. So it's only Zelensky-Putin level which is acceptable for Zelensky, especially when Trump expressed readiness to come to Istanbul as well.
So it's kind of fascinating. Russia might have backed itself into a corner here. They might have just intended this to be some sort of, low-level summit with negligible consequences. They might have even tried to push the so-called Istanbul communique, which was disastrous for Ukraine. But instead, they are now facing a choice. They're either going to show that they are serious about this process or not. Now, a related question. Do you think that the European Union, and especially the partners of Ukraine forming the so-called coalition of the willing, might have played a vital role here by saying to Russia, if you're not serious about engaging in peace talks, we're simply going to level up our sanctions. We're going to double down on this. Is Russia finally feeling the pressure here?
I think so, yes. And it's important that, first of all, the coalition of willing, Ukraine plus its partners in Europe, gave this ultimatum to Moscow to agree for 30-day ceasefire, first of all, but also they threatened with the new sanctions if Russia will not agree to it. So far, there is no ceasefire, although the deadline expired last evening, this midnight. Russian intensity of Russian strikes against Ukraine has been lowered. That's true, because usually Russia launches around 100 plus drones against Ukraine. This night it launched just 10 drones, which were successfully intercepted by Ukrainian air defenses. And generally the intensity of combat action on the front lines is slightly reduced, but slightly, not completely. On the other hand, the trump card of the European coalition of willing is on the table. They threatened Russia with new sanctions. First of all, the EU is preparing, finalizing the 17th package of sanctions against Russia. Secondly, Americans are going to join as well with their own sanctions. Britain and Norway, who are not part of the EU, will also join. Secondly, the Russian financial service sector will be further targeted, but also energy sector and especially Russian oil industry, which is of crucial importance to feed the Russian state budget, the war machine of Russian Federation. Here two things are important. First of all, the Russian so-called shadow fleet will be targeted, which consists of about 400 oil tankers which are kind of shadowly bringing oil out of Russia for exports and in exchange for petrodollars. And secondly, the West could target partners of Russia, countries which import Russian oil and gas.
Secondary sanctions. That's what was Donald Trump was hinting at some
Americans
point.
Americans even threatened with 500% tariffs on those countries who import Russian.
That's exactly the case.
Oil.
Also, according to Financial Times, apparently European countries are close to devising a mechanism to circumvent the possible problems with Hungary. Hungary has been problematic in that it would often oppose the idea of sanction packages. In the end, ultimately, the European countries were able to convince Hungary not to completely block that. But now apparently they have a mechanism to use different means. Is this finally a moment where Russia will begin to realize that there is no walking away from this? So they're either going to reduce and ultimately stop the attacks against Ukraine, or is going to face consequences?
Yeah, the pressure on Russia is quite intensive. That they didn't accept. Putin offered this kind of victory day ceasefire for 3 days, but then again targeted Ukraine, bombed Ukraine with drones and missiles after it expired. And now this offer of 30-day ceasefire is on the table, and people saying, if you are for peace, if you are against the war, as you insist on, then please accept this offer of 3-day unconditional ceasefire on the land, in the air, and on the sea. But Putin didn't mention it at all. He didn't say no. He was clever enough to avoid saying no to this offer of ceasefire, but nevertheless offered this talks in Turkey, which were immediately accepted by Zelensky, and he raised the stake, as we discussed, to the highest possible level. Speaking of Hungary, it was kind of the expectation in Ukraine was that during the Polish presidency in the European Union, which will last until the end of June, Ukraine will open at least 1 or 2, maybe 3 clusters for EU accession out of 6 clusters altogether. But Hungary has been blocking this, and Ukrainians hoped that Polish presidency will help them to open these first clusters. And so far, these hopes did not materialize because of Hungary vetoes. And Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is constantly putting obstacles on the Ukraine's EU integration. So the Hungarian problem is there, but the Brussels EU bureaucracy should think of a way how to avoid this Hungarian veto. Because
as this would also send the right signal, right, for Ukraine's accession and Ukraine's future. Rostyslav Khotin was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you, Janusz.
And I'm Janusz Lewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.